In suburban Phoenix, 43-year-old Sarah Mitchell discovered an old photograph that would unravel her entire reality. What began as spring cleaning became a journey into her past when she noticed something impossible in the background. Before we continue, drop a comment if you've ever experienced déjà vu. There are moments in life when the people closest to us reveal exactly how little they think we're worth. For me, Maria Santos, that moment came on a Tuesday afternoon in the gleaming conference room of TechForward Solutions, 8th floor of Summit Business Plaza, when I heard my own son describe me as just the cleaning lady to his boss. What he didn't know was that the cleaning lady he was so casually dismissing owned every square inch of the building they were sitting in. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I had been working the night shift at Summit Business Plaza for 3 years, arriving each evening at 6 o'clock sharp with my cart full of supplies, my hair pulled back in a simple ponytail, and my uniform bearing the logo of Apex Cleaning Services. To everyone who passed me in the hallways, I was exactly what I appeared to be: Maria Santos, a 52-year-old woman who cleaned offices to make ends meet. They saw the woman who emptied their trash cans, vacuumed their carpets, and wiped down their conference tables. They had no idea they were looking at Maria Santos, founder and CEO of Santos Property Group, owner of 17 commercial buildings across Phoenix, and the person who signed their landlord agreements. The deception hadn't started intentionally. When I first acquired Summit Business Plaza 5 years ago, it was just another investment property in my growing portfolio. I had planned to hire a management company to handle the day-to-day operations while I focused on expanding my real estate empire. But then my son David landed his first real job out of college at TechForward Solutions, one of the tenant companies on the 8th floor, and everything changed. David had struggled after graduation. Despite his marketing degree from Arizona State University, he'd bounced between temporary positions and internships for nearly 2 years. When he finally got the call from TechForward Solutions, offering him a marketing coordinator position, I watched my son transform from a dejected young man into someone who walked with purpose again. He was so proud of that job, so eager to prove himself in the corporate world, that I made a decision that would complicate our lives in ways I never anticipated. I decided not to tell him I owned his building. At the time, it seemed like a kindness. David had always been sensitive about money, especially after his father left when he was 16. He'd watched me work multiple jobs to put him through school, never knowing that I was actually building a business empire one property at a time. When he was in high school, I really had been cleaning offices to pay the bills. But somewhere along the way, I'd stopped being the employee and started being the employer. I'd gone from scrubbing floors to owning the buildings where others scrubbed floors. The transition hadn't happened overnight. It began 25 years ago, when I was a young mother struggling to support David after his father abandoned us. I took a job with a small cleaning company, working nights so I could be home when David got out of school. The work was hard, but it taught me something valuable about commercial real estate. I saw which buildings were well maintained and which were falling apart. I learned which locations attracted quality tenants and which struggled with vacancy. Most importantly, I discovered that building owners often viewed cleaning services as a necessary evil rather than a valuable partnership. After 3 years of cleaning other people's buildings, I took a leap that terrified me. I borrowed against everything I owned to start Apex Cleaning Service. My business plan was simple: provide better service than the competition, while treating cleaning staff like professionals rather than invisible workers. Within 2 years, I had contracts with 8 buildings downtown. Within 5 years, I was employing 30 people and had saved enough money to make my first real estate investment. That first property was a small office building in a developing area of Phoenix. The previous owner was struggling with high vacancy rates and deferred maintenance. I bought it below market value, invested in improvements, and within 18 months, had it fully leased at competitive rates. The monthly income from that single building was more than I'd ever made cleaning offices, but I didn't stop there. I reinvested every dollar of profit into acquiring more properties, building what would eventually become Santos Property Group. By the time David graduated from college, I owned 12 buildings and employed over 100 people through my cleaning service. My personal wealth had grown beyond anything I'd imagined possible when I was a young mother working night shifts. But David knew none of this. To him, I was still his mother who worked hard to provide for their small family. I'd been so careful to maintain the illusion of our modest lifestyle that he never questioned how I could afford his college tuition or why we never seemed to struggle financially despite my supposedly limited income. When David got the job at TechForward Solutions, I saw an opportunity to stay connected to his professional life in a way that felt natural. I assigned myself to the cleaning contract for Summit Business Plaza, taking over the 8th floor personally. This meant I could see David's workplace, meet his colleagues, and understand the environment where he was building his career. I told myself I was being a protective mother watching out for my son in his first real corporate job. What I didn't anticipate was how invisible I would become to David in that environment. At home, I was his mother, someone whose opinions mattered and whose presence was valued. At his office, I was part of the background, no more significant than the coffee machine or the copy paper. The transformation was so complete that sometimes I wondered if he'd forgotten we were related when he saw me pushing my cleaning cart down the hallway. The first time David walked past me at TechForward Solutions without acknowledgement, I told myself he was just being professional. After all, it might seem strange to his colleagues if he stopped to chat with the cleaning lady, but as weeks turned into months, the pattern became clear. David wasn't just maintaining professional boundaries, he was actively distancing himself from any association with me and his workplace. I began to notice the small signals that revealed David's discomfort with my presence. When I cleaned near his desk, he would suddenly remember important calls he needed to make in the conference room. If colleagues were around when I emptied the trash in his area, he would become intensely focused on his computer screen, never making eye contact. Once I overheard him telling a coworker that he couldn't join them for Driss because he had to help his mother with some stuff, but he never mentioned that his mother worked in their building. The irony of the situation wasn't lost on me. Every month, TechForward Solutions wrote a substantial rent check to Santos Property Group for their office space. Their lease agreement bore my signature, though they knew me only as the owner's representative. Meanwhile, Apex Cleaning Services invoiced them for janitorial services, and I personally ensured their floors were spotless and their conference rooms were ready for important meetings. David worked in a space that I owned, cleaned by a company I had built, yet he seemed embarrassed by the woman who made all of it possible. I tried to understand his perspective. David had grown up watching me work physical jobs, and now he was part of a world where success was measured by education, salary, and professional title. In his mind, there was probably a clear hierarchy, and he saw himself as having climbed several rungs above where he thought I remained. He was proud of his college degree, his business cards, his desk in an open office environment where he collaborated with other young professionals. From his viewpoint, acknowledging a personal relationship with the cleaning staff might undermine the professional image he was working so hard to establish. But understanding his perspective didn't make the dismissal hurt any less. Every evening as I cleaned the 8th floor, I was reminded that my son valued the opinions of his colleagues more than his relationship with me. He would laugh and joke with Jennifer Walsh from the marketing team, seek advice from senior staff members, and eagerly participate in office discussions about industry trends. But when I was present, he became a different person. Someone who couldn't risk association with the woman who had sacrificed everything to give him the opportunities he was now enjoying. The irony deepened when I realized that David often stayed late at the office, working on projects or networking with colleagues, during the exact hours when I was cleaning the building. We would be in the same space, breathing the same air but existing in completely separate worlds. He was the ambitious marketing coordinator building his career, and I was the invisible service worker who maintained his environment. Sometimes we were separated by nothing more than a glass conference room wall, but we might as well have been on different planets. I began to pay closer attention to David's work relationships, partly out of maternal concern, and partly out of curiosity about the world he was so eager to embrace. Jennifer Walsh, his colleague in the marketing department, seemed like a genuinely kind person. She always thanked me when I cleaned around her desk and sometimes asked about my day. Robert Mitchell, the regional manager, was David's direct supervisor and someone David clearly wanted to impress. I watched David carefully observe Mitchell's behavior, adopting similar speech patterns and even mimicking some of his mannerisms. Mitchell was the kind of manager who measured success by traditional corporate metrics. He wore expensive suits, drove a luxury car that he parked in the premium spots, and spoke frequently about his MBA from a prestigious university. He had the corner office with floor-to-ceiling windows and a view of the Phoenix skyline. When he walked through the office, people straightened up and paid attention. He was everything David aspired to become, and it was clear that earning Mitchell's respect had become David's primary professional goal. Through my evening cleaning routine, I learned more about David's work life than he ever shared with me at home. I saw the projects he worked on, the presentations he prepared, and the extra effort he put into every assignment. He was talented and hardworking, qualities I had always known he possessed. But I also saw how desperately he wanted to fit into this corporate culture, how carefully he modulated his behavior to match what he thought was expected of him. The transformation was most evident during office social events. TechForward Solutions had a monthly happy hour where employees gathered in the conference room after work hours. I would clean around these events, and I could see David in his element, networking and building relationships with his colleagues. He was articulate, charming, and professionally ambitious. He would discuss marketing strategies, share industry insights, and position himself as someone with valuable contributions to make. These were moments when I felt genuinely proud of the man he was becoming. But my pride was always tempered by the knowledge that he was ashamed of the woman who had made his success possible. During these social gatherings, if someone mentioned seeing the cleaning staff around the building, David would nod politely but never reveal any personal connection. He had become skilled at deflecting conversations that might lead to questions about his background or family circumstances. I started to wonder if I had made the right choice in hiding my true circumstances from David. Perhaps if he knew the truth about Santos Property Group, he would feel more confident about his own achievements. Maybe his embarrassment stemmed from thinking I was struggling financially while he was building his career. But every time I considered revealing the truth, I hesitated. The deception had gone on so long that the revelation would raise uncomfortable questions about why I had hidden my success in the first place. There was another factor that complicated my decision to maintain the illusion. Despite the emotional cost of David's dismissal, I had come to value my role as Maria the cleaning lady. In this identity, I was invisible but also incredibly well-informed. I knew which companies were thriving and which were struggling. I learned about upcoming lease renewals, expansion plans, and business challenges. This information was invaluable for my real estate investments, but it also gave me insights into David's professional world that I would never have gained as his mother. Moreover, the work itself had reconnected me with my roots in ways I hadn't expected. Building Santos Property Group had required me to become someone who thought in terms of profit margins, rental rates, and investment return. I had learned to speak the language of real estate development and property management, but cleaning offices reminded me of the woman who had started with nothing but determination and willingness to work hard. It kept me grounded in the reality that success wasn't just about accumulating wealth. It was about maintaining dignity and purpose regardless of what others thought of your circumstances. As months passed, I settled into a routine that allowed me to navigate both worlds. During the day, I was Maria Santos, real estate mogul, attending board meetings and reviewing property acquisitions from my penthouse office downtown. In the evenings, I was Maria the cleaning lady, pushing my cart through Summit Business Plaza and maintaining the pristine environment where my son was building his career. The duality was exhausting but also oddly satisfying. I was living proof that people's assumptions about others were often completely wrong. But the emotional toll of David's attitude was becoming harder to ignore. At home, our relationship remained warm and close. He would tell me about his successes at work, seek my advice on professional challenges, and share his ambitions for advancement within the company. These conversations were precious to me because they showed that he still valued my opinions and trusted my judgment. But they were also painful because they highlighted the disconnect between how he saw me at home versus how he treated me at his workplace. The contradiction came to a head during one of our dinner conversations. David was excited about a presentation he was preparing for, Robert Mitchell, something that could lead to a promotion opportunity. He spent 20 minutes explaining his marketing strategy, asking for my input on his slides, and practicing his talking point. I was impressed by his preparation and his strategic thinking. This was clearly someone who understood business and had valuable insights to contribute. Then he mentioned that he would be staying late all week to perfect the presentation, and he apologized for not being able to help me with some household tasks I had mentioned. In that moment, I realized the absurdity of our situation. David was staying late in a building I own, preparing a presentation in conference rooms I maintained, seeking success in a company that paid rent to my business empire. Yet he felt the need to apologize for not helping his mother with chores because he assumed I needed his assistance to manage my simple life. The week of David's big presentation was when everything began to unravel. I knew the presentation was scheduled for Thursday afternoon in the main conference room, and I had planned to clean that room Wednesday evening to ensure it was perfect for David's important meeting. As I worked, I found myself hoping that his presentation would go well, that Mitchell would recognize David's talents, and that my son would achieve the professional recognition he was working so hard to earn. But I also found myself wondering how much longer I could maintain this double life. The emotional cost of being dismissed by my own son was becoming unbearable, and the practical complications of managing my business empire while pretending to be a cleaning lady were increasingly difficult to navigate. Something would have to change, but I had no idea that the change would come so suddenly or so dramatically. Thursday afternoon arrived with all the anticipation David had been building toward for weeks. His presentation was scheduled for 3 o'clock, and I knew he had been nervous about it all morning. As I went about my day managing Santos Property Group business, I found myself thinking about David's meeting and hoping it would go well. I had no intention of being anywhere near TechForward Solutions during his presentation. I wanted to give him space to succeed without any complications from my presence. But sometimes fate has other plans. That afternoon I received an urgent call from Jennifer Walsh at TechForward Solutions. There had been a plumbing issue in the building's main conference room, and they needed to move David's presentation to a different location immediately. As the building owner, I needed to coordinate with maintenance and ensure that alternative space was available. What should have been a simple facilities management issue was about to become the moment when my two worlds collided in the most dramatic way possible. The call from Jennifer Walsh came at exactly 2:47 p.m., 13 minutes before David's scheduled presentation to Robert Mitchell. I was reviewing quarterly earnings reports for my property portfolio when my phone buzzed with an unfamiliar internal extension from Summit Business Plaza. "Miss Santos?" Jennifer's voice carried the urgent tone of someone dealing with an unexpected crisis. "This is Jennifer Walsh from TechForward Solutions. We have an emergency situation with our conference room, and we need immediate assistance from building management." I switched seamlessly into my role as property owner, though Jennifer had no idea she was speaking directly to the person whose name was on the building's deed. "What's the nature of the emergency, Miss Walsh?" "There's water damage in conference room A from a burst pipe in the ceiling. We have a critical presentation starting in 10 minutes, and we need alternative space immediately." David Santos from our marketing team has been preparing for this meeting for weeks, and our regional manager Robert Mitchell flew in specifically for this presentation. The irony wasn't lost on me that Jennifer was asking building management to help save my own son's career opportunity. "I understand the urgency. Conference room B on your floor should be available, but it may need immediate setup for your presentation requirement." "That's the problem," Jennifer continued, her stress evident. "Conference room B hasn't been cleaned today, and there are coffee stains on the table from yesterday's client meeting. We can't present to Mr. Mitchell in a room that looks unprofessional. Is there any way someone from the cleaning staff could address this in the next few minutes?" I found myself in an impossible situation. As building owner, I needed to solve this crisis for my tenant. As David's mother, I wanted his presentation to succeed. But as the cleaning lady he was ashamed to acknowledge, responding to this request would place me directly in the path of his most important professional moment. "I'll handle this personally," I heard myself saying. "Someone will be there within 5 minutes to prepare the space." I hung up the phone and stared at my reflection in the glass wall of my executive office. The woman looking back at me wore a tailored business suit and pearl earrings, her silver hair styled in a professional chignon. In 20 minutes I would need to transform into Maria the cleaning lady and rescue my son's presentation while he pretended not to know me. The drive from my downtown office to Summit Business Plaza took exactly 12 minutes in mid-afternoon traffic. I kept a complete cleaning uniform in my car for emergencies, exactly like this one, though I had never imagined the emergency would involve my son's career. In the building's service elevator, I changed from executive to invisible worker, trading my designer blazer for the navy blue uniform shirt with Apex Cleaning Services embroidered over the pocket. The 8th floor was in controlled chaos when I arrived. David stood outside conference room A, his presentation materials clutched in his hands, while a maintenance worker mopped water from the carpet. His face showed the kind of panic that comes from watching months of preparation crumble in the final moment. Robert Mitchell paced nearby, checking his watch and speaking tersely into his phone about flight connections and schedule changes. Jennifer spotted me first and rushed over with relief visible in her entire posture. Thank goodness someone's here. We moved everything to conference room B, but it really needs attention before Mr. Mitchell sees it. I nodded professionally and wheeled my cart toward the alternative conference room, passing within 3 feet of Dave. He glanced up briefly, his eyes meeting mine for a split second before sliding away without recognition. In that moment I wasn't his mother who had spent the previous evening helping him rehearse his talking point. I was simply the cleaning staff, summoned to handle a problem that was beneath his notice. Conference room B was indeed a mess. Previous occupants had left coffee rings on the polished table, crumbs scattered across the surface, and fingerprints smudged across the glass whiteboard. The chairs were pushed at odd angles, and someone had left sticky notes adhered to the table edge. It was exactly the kind of unprofessional environment that could undermine David's carefully crafted presentation before he spoke a single word. I worked with the efficiency that comes from decades of experience, transforming the space in methodical steps. Glass cleaner eliminated the whiteboard smudges and window streaks. Wood polish brought the conference table back to its original luster. I straightened chairs, emptied trash receptacles, and ensured every surface reflected the kind of attention to detail that Robert Mitchell would expect from a professional environment. As I worked, I could hear David's voice in the hallway, explaining the situation to Mitchell and apologizing for the delay. His tone carried the careful deference of someone speaking to a person whose opinion could make or break his career. Mitchell's responses were clipped and impatient, suggesting that his tolerance for unexpected complications was limited. "The room will be ready in just a moment, Mr. Mitchell," Jennifer assured him. "Our cleaning staff is making sure everything meets your standard." I finished my work and began packing my supplies, but Jennifer stopped me with an urgent whisper. "Could you stay nearby for a few minutes, just in case they need anything during the presentation? Mr. Mitchell is very particular about his environment." It was a reasonable request from a facilities management perspective, but it meant I would be present during David's presentation, invisible but aware of every word he spoke. I positioned my cart in the adjacent break room, close enough to respond quickly if needed, but far enough away to avoid being a distraction. Through the partially open door, I watched David enter conference room B with Robert Mitchell and Jennifer. David had transformed from the panicked young man in the hallway into a confident professional ready to deliver his presentation. He moved with purpose, setting up his laptop and checking his slides with practiced efficiency. "Impressive recovery from the crisis," Mitchell commented, settling into the chair at the head of the table. "Let's see if your presentation content matches your adaptability under pressure." David launched into his presentation with the kind of passion that made me proud to be his mother. He had prepared a comprehensive marketing strategy for TechForward Solutions, expansion into new market segments, complete with demographic analysis, competitive positioning, and projected revenue impact. His research was thorough, his recommendations were strategic, and his delivery was polished and professional. I found myself genuinely impressed by his insights and presentation skills. This wasn't just my son making me proud, this was a talented professional demonstrating real value to his organization. David had clearly inherited both intellectual capability and work ethic, and he was channeling both into a career opportunity that could define his professional trajectory. Mitchell listened intently, occasionally asking probing questions that David answered with confidence and supporting data. The presentation was going exactly as David had hoped, building toward recommendations that could position him for the promotion he desperately wanted. Then Mitchell asked the question that changed everything. "This is solid work, David. Really impressive research and strategic thinking. Before we discuss implementation, I'm curious about your background. What shaped your perspective on working-class market segments? Your insights into blue-collar consumer behavior seem particularly nuanced for someone with your educational profile." David's confidence flickered for just a moment, a hesitation so brief that Mitchell probably didn't notice it. But I saw the slight tensing of his shoulders, the quick glance toward the door, the internal calculation about how much personal information to reveal. "I've always been interested in diverse market demographics," David replied carefully. "I think it's important to understand consumers across different socioeconomic levels to develop effective marketing strategies." It was a perfectly reasonable answer, but Mitchell pressed deeper. "Sure, but there's a difference between academic interest and genuine understanding. Your presentation suggests real familiarity with working-class priorities and spending patterns. Did you grow up in that environment? Or did you do extensive field research?" I watched my son wrestle with a question that shouldn't have been difficult to answer. The truth was simple: he understood working-class perspectives, because he had been raised by a working-class mother who had started with nothing and built something extraordinary through determination and hard work. His insights came from watching me navigate financial challenges, make difficult choices, and find dignity in honest labor. But David couldn't say that without acknowledging that his mother was exactly the kind of working-class person he was analyzing as a market segment. He couldn't reveal his authentic background without risking the professional image he had worked so hard to cultivate. "I believe in thorough research," David said finally. "I spent time interviewing people from various backgrounds to understand their perspectives and priorities." It wasn't technically a lie, but it wasn't the truth either. David was repositing his lived experience as academic research, creating distance between himself and the reality of his upbringing. He was treating his own family history as something to be studied rather than something that had shaped his character and capabilities. Mitchell nodded approvingly. "That's exactly the kind of initiative I like to see. Too many marketers rely on assumptions instead of actual consumer insight. Your research methodology shows real professional maturity." The compliment should have been a moment of triumph for David, validation that his work was exceptional and his career was on the right track. Instead, I watched him accept praise for interviewing people like his own mother while the woman who had actually provided those insights cleaned conference rooms 20 feet away. Jennifer, who had been quietly observing the presentation, chose that moment to contribute her own perspective. David's insights are impressive, and they're particularly valuable given our client base. We serve a lot of small and medium-sized businesses, whose employees represent exactly the demographic he's analyzed. "Absolutely," Mitchell agreed. "Understanding the economic pressures and priorities of working families is crucial for developing products and services that truly meet their needs." "David, your presentation demonstrates exactly the kind of market awareness that separates great marketers from good ones." I felt a complex mixture of pride and pain as I listened to this exchange. David had indeed developed sophisticated understanding of working-class economic realities, and his marketing insights were genuinely valuable. He deserved recognition for his analytical skills and strategic thinking. But the source of his authentic understanding was standing invisible in the next room, reduced to someone he was ashamed to acknowledge. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The presentation continued for another 15 minutes, with David fielding questions about implementation timelines, budget requirements, and success metrics. His answers were consistently intelligent and well-reasoned, demonstrating that his marketing strategy wasn't just theoretical but practically achievable. Mitchell's approval became increasingly evident as the presentation progressed. He leaned forward in his chair, took detailed notes, and asked the kind of follow-up questions that suggested genuine interest in David's recommendations. This was clearly going better than David had dared to hope when he was panicking about the flooded conference room an hour earlier. "Outstanding work, David," Mitchell concluded, as David finished his final slide. This is exactly the kind of strategic thinking we need as we expand our market presence. I'm recommending you for immediate promotion to Senior Marketing Specialist, with responsibility for implementing this strategy across our southwestern region. David's face lit up with the kind of joy that comes from achieving a long-sought goal. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. I'm honored by your confidence and excited about the opportunity to contribute at a higher level. You've earned it, Mitchell replied, standing up and extending his hand. Jennifer, please work with HR to process David's promotion immediately. I want him in the new role before I leave Phoenix next week. As they shook hands, I felt genuine happiness for my son's professional success. He had worked hard for this opportunity, and his promotion was based on merit and genuine achievement. This was the culmination of years of education, months of preparation, and weeks of anxiety about this specific presentation. But my happiness was complicated by the knowledge that David's success story was incomplete. The narrative he had constructed about his background, his research methodology, and his consumer insights was built on careful omissions about the woman who had actually shaped his understanding of working-class realities. Mitchell gathered his materials and headed toward the door, pausing to address Jennifer about logistics for David's transition to his new role. David began packing up his laptop, practically glowing with satisfaction about how the presentation had exceeded his expectations. That's when Mitchell noticed my cleaning cart positioned just outside the conference room. Jennifer, is the cleaning staff always positioned so close to our meetings? He asked with mild irritation. It seems unnecessarily intrusive for confidential business discussion. Jennifer looked embarrassed and quickly moved toward where I was working. I'm sorry, Mr. Mitchell. I asked her to stay nearby in case you needed anything after the room crisis earlier. I'll make sure she maintains appropriate distance in the future. I was gathering my supplies and preparing to disappear into the service areas of the building when David chose that moment to contribute to the conversation in a way that would shatter both our carefully maintained illusion. Don't worry about it, David said dismissively, not even looking in my direction. She's just the cleaning lady, they're practically invisible anyway. I barely notice them when they're around. The words hit me like a physical blow, not because they were intentionally cruel, but because they revealed exactly how my son saw me in this environment. I wasn't just someone he failed to acknowledge, I was someone he considered fundamentally beneath notice. In his mind, I occupied the same category as furniture or equipment, present but irrelevant to anything that mattered. Mitchell nodded in agreement. True enough. Good cleaning staff should be unobtrusive. Though I have to say, whoever cleaned this conference room did exceptional work on short notice. Professional environments matter for important presentations. Absolutely, David agreed, finally achieving the kind of casual conversation with Mitchell that he had always wanted. Attention to detail in the work environment reflects the company's overall standards. I stood frozen outside the conference room, my cleaning cart handle gripped so tightly my knuckles had turned white. My son was building rapport with his boss by agreeing that people like me should remain invisible, while praising the very work I had just performed to save his presentation. The irony would have been amusing if it hadn't been so devastating. Jennifer looked uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. I think our facilities staff work very hard to maintain professional standards, she said diplomatically. We're fortunate to have such dedicated service. But David was too caught up in his moment of connection with Mitchell to recognize Jennifer's subtle attempt to redirect the conversation. He was finally having the kind of peer-level discussion with his boss that he had dreamed about, and he wasn't going to let it end. The thing is, David continued, people in service positions don't really understand business environments the way professionals do. They're just following procedures without comprehending the bigger picture. It's a completely different level of engagement with the work. Mitchell chuckled in agreement. That's a perceptive observation, David. It's one of the distinctions between tactical execution and strategic thinking. Understanding the economic pressures and priorities of working families is key to creating products and services that truly serve their needs. David, your presentation reflects precisely the kind of market insight that sets exceptional marketers apart from the rest. As I listened to those words, I was overwhelmed by a conflicting wave of pride and pain. David had indeed developed a sharp, insightful grasp of working-class economics, and his marketing strategy was genuinely impressive. He had earned recognition for his intelligence and strategic thinking, but the depth of his understanding came from someone else. Someone standing just out of view in the next room, someone he now seemed ashamed to acknowledge. The presentation continued for another 15 minutes. David confidently answered questions about timelines, budgets, and performance metrics. His responses showed not only intellectual depth, but also practical, actionable plans. Mitchell's interest became more and more obvious. He leaned forward, scribbled notes, and asked detailed follow-up questions that showed he was seriously considering David's proposal. Things were going better than David had likely hoped for, especially after the earlier panic about the flooded room. "Excellent work, David," Mitchell said, as the final slide faded from the screen. "This is exactly the kind of forward thinking we need for our market expansion. I'm recommending you for an immediate promotion to Senior Marketing Specialist. You'll be leading this strategy in our southwestern region." David's face lit up, pure joy radiating from him, the joy of finally reaching a goal that had taken years of hard work. "Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. I'm truly honored and excited to take on this new responsibility." "You've earned it," Mitchell replied, standing and offering his hand. "Jennifer, please coordinate with HR and get this processed. I want David in the new role before I leave Phoenix next week." They shook hands, and I couldn't help but feel genuine happiness for my son. He had worked hard, prepared thoroughly, and earned this through talent and dedication. It was a proud moment, but alongside that happiness was something more complicated, a sense of being erased. David's story of success, his narrative about how he came to understand working-class struggles, was built on silence. Silence about me, the woman who had lived those struggles, who had shaped that understanding with lived experience he now treated like an abstract case study. As the meeting wrapped up, Mitchell gathered his papers and turned toward the exit, pausing briefly. His eyes landed on the cleaning cart just outside the room. "Jennifer," he said, a bit irritated, "is it normal for cleaning staff to be stationed this close to private meetings? Seems like an unnecessary distraction during sensitive discussions." Clearly flustered, Jennifer responded quickly. "Sorry, Mr. Mitchell, I asked her to stay nearby in case anything came up. Given the earlier water issue, I'll make sure she keeps a better distance going forward." I had started gathering my things, ready to retreat back to the building's quieter corners, when David spoke, and broke the fragile illusion we'd both been clinging to. "Don't worry about it," he said casually without even glancing toward me. "She's just the cleaning lady. They're basically invisible. I hardly even noticed them." His words landed like a punch, not because they were cruel but because they revealed how he truly saw me in this setting. I wasn't just unacknowledged. I was, to him, essentially invisible. A background presence, irrelevant to what really mattered. Mitchell nodded. "True, good janitorial staff should stay in the background. But I will say, this room was cleaned impressively fast. The space looked great for the presentation." "Absolutely," David said, sounding pleased. "The work environment reflects company standards. Clean spaces signal professionalism." I stood frozen, gripping my cart so hard my knuckles went pale. My son had just won the recognition he had long desired, while dismissing the person who helped make it possible, and praising my work without realizing it was mine. The irony would have been almost funny if it hadn't hurt so deeply. Jennifer shifted uncomfortably. "I think our facilities team does a great job keeping everything up to standard," she said tactfully. "We're lucky to have such committed workers." But David was too caught up in his success to notice her discomfort. He had finally made the kind of connection with Mitchell he had always longed for, and he wasn't going to let it slip away. "The thing is," he continued, "people in those kinds of jobs don't really understand business the way professionals do. They follow instructions but don't grasp the larger picture. It's a totally different level of involvement." Mitchell laughed lightly. "That's an insightful point, David. It's the difference between simply executing tasks and thinking strategically." The color drained from David's face as the implications of my words began to register. His mouth opened slightly, then closed again as he struggled to process what he was hearing. Jennifer looked completely confused, clearly unable to understand how her colleague could have regular dinner plans with the building's cleaning staff. "That's not possible," David said quietly, but his voice lacked conviction. "I would remember if we'd met before." "Would?" I asked, allowing years of suppressed emotion to color my tone, because I've been watching you walk past me in these hallways for 3 years, and you've never once shown any sign of recognition. I've cleaned around your desk dozens of times while you worked late, and you've never acknowledged my presence. So perhaps the question isn't whether we've met, but whether you've been paying attention. David's face went through a series of expressions as understanding began to dawn. Confusion gave way to disbelief, then to a dawning horror as he started to piece together the impossible truth that his mother and the cleaning lady he had just dismissed as practically invisible were the same person. The word came out as barely a whisper, filled with shock and growing mortification. Jennifer's eyes widened as she looked back and forth between us, finally understanding the family connection she had been witnessing. "Oh my God," she breathed. "Maria is your mother." I nodded slowly, never taking my eyes off David's face. Maria Santos, David's mother, also known as the cleaning lady who's practically invisible and doesn't understand business environments the way professionals do. The reference to his earlier comments hit David like a physical blow. He stumbled backward, his face flushing with embarrassment and something that looked like panic. "I didn't know," he stammered. "I had no idea you were working here. Why didn't you tell me? When exactly should I have told you?" I asked, my voice remaining steady despite the storm of emotions beneath the surface. "During one of our Sunday dinners when you told me about your important job and your professional colleagues. Should I have mentioned that I spend my evenings cleaning up after those same colleagues, including you?" Jennifer looked stunned by the revelation, and clearly uncomfortable being caught in the middle of a family crisis. "Maybe I should give you two some privacy," she offered, starting to back away. "No," I said firmly. "Please stay, Jennifer. I think it's important that David's colleagues understand exactly who they've been walking past in these hallways for the past 3 years. David's embarrassment was now complete and visible. His hands shook slightly as he ran them through his hair, and his voice cracked when he spoke. "Mom, please, not here, not like this. Can't we discuss this at home?" "Why?" I asked, taking a step closer to him. "Are you embarrassed to be seen talking to the cleaning lady? Concerned about what it might do to your professional image if your colleagues know your mother empties their trash cans?" "That's not fair," David protested, but his voice lacked strength. "I didn't know it was you. If you had known." "What?" I interrupted. "You would have treated me differently. You would have acknowledged my existence, or would you have found some way to transfer to a different building so you wouldn't have to risk being associated with service staff?" Jennifer watched this exchange with growing understanding and what looked like disappointment in David. She was clearly reassessing everything she thought she knew about her colleague's character and background. "David," she said quietly, "you told Ms. Mitchell earlier that you did research by interviewing working-class people about their perspectives and priorities. Were you talking about interviewing your own mother?" The question hung in the air like an accusation. David opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, as he realized that any answer would reveal the extent to which he had misrepresented his background and research methodology. "It's complicated," he finally managed to say. "No," I said firmly. "It's not complicated at all. David grew up watching me work multiple jobs to support our family. He learned about working-class priorities by living them, not by conducting academic research. Every insight he shared in that presentation came from watching his mother struggle to pay bills, make difficult financial decisions, and find dignity in honest work. But he couldn't say that, because he was ashamed to admit that his mother is exactly the kind of person he was analyzing as a market demographic." Jennifer's expression shifted from confusion to something that looked like disappointment. "David, is that true? Did you misrepresent your research methodology to Mr. Mitchell?" David's professional crisis was now compounding his personal one. Not only had he been exposed as someone who was ashamed of his mother's work, but he was also facing questions about his honesty and integrity in his most important presentation. "I didn't lie," he said defensively. "I do understand working-class perspectives, and my insights were genuine. The source of that understanding doesn't change the validity of my recommendations. But it changes everything about how you presented yourself," Jennifer replied. "You made it sound like you went out and did field research, when really, you were drawing on your own family experience. That's not dishonest, But it's not what you told Mr. Mitchell either. I watched my son struggle with the realization that his carefully constructed professional persona was crumbling in real time. The promotion he had just earned was now tainted by questions about his authenticity and his willingness to misrepresent his background to create a more favorable impression. David, I said, more gently, there's nothing wrong with coming from a working-class family. There's nothing shameful about having a mother who cleans offices for a living. What's shameful is being so concerned about your image that you pretend not to know the woman who sacrificed everything to give you the opportunities you've enjoyed. I wasn't pretending not to know you, David protested. I genuinely didn't realize you were working here, but even if I had known, what was I supposed to do? Stop and chat with you in front of my colleagues, introduce you as my mother to everyone in the office? Yes, I said simply. That's exactly what you should have done, because I am your mother, and there's nothing about that fact that should cause you embarrassment or concern about your professional standing. Jennifer nodded in agreement. David, plenty of people in this office have family members who work in service industries. Nobody would think less of you for having a mother who works hard to support herself, but they might think less of you for being ashamed of her. The truth of Jennifer's observation seemed to hit David with particular force. He looked around the familiar office environment, as if seeing it for the first time, perhaps imagining how his colleagues would react to learning about his family background and his treatment of his mother. I wasn't ashamed, he said, but his voice lacked conviction. I was just trying to maintain professional boundaries. Boundaries? I asked, allowing disbelief to color my tone. David, professional boundaries don't require you to treat your mother like she's invisible. They don't require you to speak about cleaning staff as if they're not fully human, and they certainly don't require you to misrepresent your background to create a false impression about your research methodology. The weight of his behavior was clearly beginning to sink in for Dave. He sat down heavily in one of the conference room chairs, his head in his hands, as the full implications of what had just been revealed became clear to him. What do you want me to do? He asked, his voice muffled by his hands. How do I fix this? It was the first time in our entire conversation that David had asked a question that suggested he understood he had done something wrong that needed to be corrected. But I wasn't ready to make this easy for him, because easy solutions wouldn't lead to the kind of fundamental change our relationship needed. I want you to understand something, I said, pulling out a chair and sitting down across from him. For 3 years, I have watched you walk past me in these hallways without acknowledgement. I have cleaned around your desk while you worked late, and you have never once thanked me, or even made eye contact. I have listened to you talk about your job, your colleagues, and your professional aspirations, and you have never once asked about my work or shown any interest in my life beyond how it affects yours. David looked up at me, with red-rimmed eyes. I thought you were just working a regular cleaning job. I didn't know it mattered to you that much. That's exactly the problem, I replied. You assumed that because I clean offices, my work doesn't matter, my feelings don't matter, and I don't deserve basic courtesy and respect. You decided that people in service positions are beneath your notice, and you treated me accordingly. Jennifer had remained quiet during this exchange, but now she spoke up with obvious discomfort. David, I need to ask you something directly. When you spoke to Mitchell about service workers not understanding business environments and being focused only on tactical execution, were you talking about your own mother? The question forced David to confront the cruelest aspect of his behavior. Not only had he dismissed me personally, but he had used his dismissal of me as a way to bond with his boss and demonstrate his own professional sophistication. I was speaking generally, David said weakly. I wasn't thinking about any specific person. You were thinking about people exactly like your mother, I corrected. People who work hard, follow procedures, and take pride in doing their jobs well. You characterized us as incapable of strategic thinking and broader understanding, and you used that characterization to position yourself as superior. The accuracy of my observation seemed to shock David into silence. He stared at me as if he was seeing me clearly for the first time, and what he was seeing was forcing him to reconsider everything he thought he knew about himself and his value. I need to tell you something else, I continued, deciding that if we were going to have this conversation, It needed to be complete. Something that might help you understand exactly how wrong your assumptions have been. David looked up at me, with apprehension, clearly sensing that more revelations were coming. I don't clean this building because it's the only work I can find, I said slowly. I don't work for Apex Cleaning Services because I need the income to pay my bill. I took this assignment specifically because I wanted to stay connected to your professional life and understand the environment where you were building your career. Jennifer looked confused by this statement. I don't understand. If you don't need the work, why are you here? I took a deep breath and made the decision to reveal the truth that would change everything about how both David and Jennifer understood our entire situation. Because I own this building, I said quietly. I own Summit Business Plaza, and I own Apex Cleaning Services. I assigned myself to clean the 8th floor because I wanted to see where my son worked and meet the people he spent his days with. The silence that followed my revelation was complete and profound. David's face went through a series of expressions, starting with disbelief and moving through shock toward something that looked like panic. Jennifer's mouth fell open as she processed the implications of what I had just told them. That's impossible, David whispered. You live in a small apartment. You drive an old Honda. You shop at discount stores and clip coupons. You can't own a building like this. I live in a small apartment because I chose to maintain the lifestyle you were familiar with. I replied, I drive an old Honda because reliable transportation doesn't require luxury features. I shop carefully because those habits served me well when I was building my business empire, and I saw no reason to change them just because my circumstances had improved. Jennifer found her voice first. You own this building? You're our landlord? I nodded. Santos Property Group owns 17 commercial buildings in Phoenix, including this one. I founded the company 25 years ago, starting with Apex Cleaning Services and expanding into property acquisition and management. Every month, TechForward Solutions writes a rent check to my company for the space where David works. David stood up abruptly, pacing to the window and staring out at the Phoenix skyline as if he could find answers in the urban landscape. Why didn't you tell me? He asked, his voice barely audible. Why have you been pretending to be something you're not? Because I wanted you to feel successful on your own terms, I replied. I thought that, if you knew the extent of my business success, you might feel like your achievements were diminished by comparison. I thought I was protecting your sense of independence and accomplishment. So you've been lying to me for years, David said, turning back to face me. About your job, your income, your entire life. Everything I thought I knew about our family circumstances was false. Yes, I admitted. And I realize now that it was a mistake. By hiding my success, I taught you to see me as someone with limited capabilities and understanding. I made it easier for you to dismiss me, because I never showed you who I really was. Jennifer was shaking her head in amazement. This is incredible. David, your mother built a real estate empire while raising you as a single parent. She owns the building where you work. She runs the cleaning service that maintains your office, and she's been watching you succeed in a space she created, and you treated her like she was invisible. The full weight of the situation was clearly beginning to hit David. He slumped back into his chair, his face pale and his hands trembling slightly. I don't understand any of this. If you're successful, if you own buildings and run companies, why were you cleaning offices when I was growing up? Why did we struggle financially if you had business income? We didn't struggle because I didn't have money, I explained. We were careful with money because I was investing every dollar I could into building something larger. When you were in high school, I really was cleaning offices. But I was also acquiring my first properties and expanding Apex Cleaning Services. By the time you graduated from college, Santos Property Group was generating substantial income, but you never asked about my work or my financial situation. Because I thought I knew, David said miserably. I thought you were just a cleaning lady who worked hard to support us. I never imagined you were building an empire. Jennifer looked at David with something that might have been pity. She was building an empire while making sure you had everything you needed for your education and career, and your response was to be embarrassed by association with her. The truth of Jennifer's statement hung in the air between us. David had indeed been embarrassed by me, not because of anything I had done wrong, but because he had made assumptions about my capabilities and worth based on the work I was doing, rather than the person I actually was. "I need to call Mr. Mitchell," David said suddenly, his voice filled with panic. "I need to explain about the presentation, about my research methodology. If he finds out I misrepresented my background." "Your presentation was excellent," I interrupt. "Your insights were genuine and valuable. Your recommendations were strategically sound. The fact that your understanding comes from lived experience rather than academic research doesn't diminish the quality of your work." But I let him think I had conducted formal interviews, when really, I was just drawing on conversations with you, David protested. "That's misrepresentation. Only if you continue to pretend that conversations with your mother don't count as legitimate sources of insight," Jennifer observed. "If you had been honest about your background from the beginning, your personal experience would have been seen as an advantage, not a liability." I stood up and moved closer to David, wanting him to understand the most important part of what I was trying to tell him. "The problem isn't that you drew on your family experience for professional insights. The problem is that you were ashamed of that experience and tried to hide it. There's nothing wrong with being raised by a working mother. There's everything wrong with pretending that working mothers don't deserve respect and recognition." David looked up at me with tears forming in his eyes. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry. I had no idea what I was doing to you, how my behavior was affecting you. I thought I was just being professional." "Being professional doesn't require you to dehumanize service workers," I replied gently. "It doesn't require you to treat your mother like she's invisible. And it certainly doesn't require you to bond with your boss by agreeing that people like me don't matter." "What do I do now?" David asked desperately. "How do I fix this? How do I make up for 3 years of treating you like you didn't exist?" It was the right question, but I wasn't ready to provide easy answers. The damage to our relationship hadn't happened overnight, and repairing it would require more than apologies and good intentions. "First," I said, "you need to understand that this isn't just about how you treated me. This is about your fundamental attitude toward people who work in service positions. If you can dismiss your own mother as practically invisible, how do you treat other service workers? How do you think about people whose education, income, or job titles don't match your own?" David considered this question seriously, and I could see him mentally reviewing his interactions with restaurant servers, store clerks, maintenance workers, and other service professionals. The expression on his face suggested he wasn't entirely comfortable with what he was remembering. "I think I need to reconsider a lot of things," he admitted quietly. "Yes," I agreed. "You do, and that reconsideration needs to start with understanding that I didn't take this cleaning assignment because I needed the work. I took it because I wanted to be part of your professional world, to understand the environment where you were building your career, and to feel connected to this important part of your life." Jennifer had been listening to our conversation with obvious fascination, and now she asked the question I had been dreading. "What happens now? Are you going to continue working as cleaning staff? Or are you going to reveal your true role as the building owner?" It was a fair question, and one I had been avoiding thinking about seriously. The deception that had started as a way to stay connected to David's world had become increasingly complicated and emotionally costly, but ending it would require conversations and explanations that I wasn't sure I was ready to have. "I don't know," I admitted. "This situation has become more complex than I ever intended." I wanted to protect David's sense of independence, but instead I created circumstances that allowed him to develop attitudes and behaviors that hurt both of us. David looked at me with something that might have been hope. "Maybe this could be a fresh start for us. Maybe we could figure out how to have an honest relationship where I know who you really are and you don't have to pretend to be someone you're not." "Maybe," I agreed cautiously, "but that would require you to genuinely change how you think about service work, working class people, and the value of different kinds of contributions to society. It would require you to understand that my worth as a person isn't determined by whether I clean offices or own buildings. I understand that now, David said earnestly. At least I think I'm beginning to understand it. Jennifer checked her watch and looked uncomfortable. I hate to cut in, Jennifer said, but Mitchell will want a debrief on David's presentation soon, and this situation needs to be handled with care. David, you need to figure out whether you're going to be honest with him about your background and how you really conducted your research. Her words brought David's recent triumph into a new, uncomfortable focus. After all the effort he'd put into earning his promotion, it now came with a difficult question. Had he been fully honest? And if not, what would that mean moving forward? What do you think I should do, Mom? He asked. It was the first time in our conversation that he sought my advice instead of trying to steer the situation on his own. I paused to think, balancing the professional risks against the personal growth that telling the truth might bring. I think you need to tell Mitchell the truth, I said. Tell him your insights come from being raised by a working-class mother. You didn't study these people from the outside. You grew up among them, and there's no shame in that. You should be proud of where you come from. David's face tightened with concern. But what if he takes back the promotion? What if he thinks I lied about my qualifications? Then you'll have your answer about what kind of company TechForward really is, I replied. And you'll need to decide if you want to succeed in a place where you have to hide your true self. Jennifer nodded. David, if Mitchell judges you for your family background, that reflects more on him than it does on you. Most leaders would see your first-hand experience as a strength. David stood, walking over to the window deep in thought. When he turned back, his face had changed. He looked determined. You're both right, he said. I'm going to be honest with him about everything. If I lose the promotion, then it wasn't one I should have accepted in the first place. Pride swelled in me. For the first time, my son was choosing integrity over image, choosing honesty over ambition. I'm proud of you, I told him. That kind of character will carry you much further than any title. Jennifer smiled. I think Mitchell might actually respect you more once he knows your story. He was clearly impressed by your ideas. Realizing those ideas came from lived experience, not just theory, could make your work stand out even more. As we gathered our things to leave the room, I felt something shift. Not just in David, but in our relationship. The years of pretending were over. We would now need to move forward with transparency. As mother and son, not as strangers in separate roles. And for the first time, since he called me invisible, I felt real hope. He was about to tell his boss he was proud to be the son of a working woman. That moment marked not just a confession, but the beginning of real change. A change that might rebuild our relationship on truth, respect, and mutual understanding. The next morning came heavy with unspoken expectation. David had spent the night thinking through how to approach Robert Mitchell, while I had made my own decision, one that would forever alter the space between my two identities. I walked into Summit Business Plaza, not in my janitorial uniform, but in a sharp suit, pearl earrings, and a confidence that reflected my true role, the owner of the building. This wasn't just a wardrobe change. It was a statement. I was done hiding. After 3 years of blending into the background, I was stepping forward. The first person to notice was Thomas, the lobby's security guard who had always greeted me as Maria the cleaner. When he looked up and saw me approaching, his surprise was so strong he almost spilled his coffee. Miss Santos? He asked, confused and hesitant, clearly trying to place me. I didn't recognize you. Are you here for a meeting? Yes, Thomas, I'm meeting with several people on the 8th floor, I replied, handing him my business card. He stared at it, eyes widening as he read the title. Maria Santos, CEO, Santos Property Group, written in elegant script. You're the building owner, he said, stunned. All this time, and I've been treating me with the respect and courtesy that everyone deserves, I said gently. You've always been kind and professional, And that doesn't need to change. Still, Thomas looked rattled, clearly replaying all our past interactions in a new light. And in that moment, I realized the ripple effect that truth can have. David and I weren't the only ones about to confront uncomfortable truths. Everyone who had made assumptions based on appearance, status, or uniform would now have to re-examine what they thought they knew. The elevator ride up to the 8th floor gave me a few quiet moments to brace myself for what I knew would be a complicated day. David had messaged me earlier that morning to confirm his Mitchell, a meeting he had requested to offer some important clarifications about his presentation. What he didn't know was that I had also arranged a separate meeting with Mitchell at 11 Shore and to discuss urgent building management concerns. As the elevator doors slid open, I saw Jennifer waiting just outside. The look on her face made it clear she had been expecting me, and that she had mentally prepared for the encounter. Seeing me dressed in formal business attire seemed to reinforce the weight of everything that had been revealed the day before. "Good morning, Maria," she said, carefully choosing to use my first name, a deliberate choice, now that she knew who I truly was. "Good morning," I replied, stepping into the hallway I knew so well, the one where I had quietly spent so many evenings cleaning, listening, and observing. David's extremely nervous about his meeting with Mr. Mitchell, Jennifer said gently. "I can imagine," I replied. "Telling the truth takes courage, especially when you're unsure how it will be received." She walked with me toward the conference room. I could feel eyes on us, curious glances from employees who seemed to be trying to figure out why the familiar janitor was suddenly dressed like a senior executive. It was obvious that word had begun to spread. As we walked, Jennifer lowered her voice. "Can I ask you something? Why did you really take that cleaning job? I mean, I understand wanting to stay close to David's career, but weren't there easier ways than spending 3 years being overlooked and underestimated?" Her question struck at the heart of everything. It was perceptive, and it wasn't easy to answer. "I needed to see who David really was," I said. "Not the version I see at family dinners, but the man he becomes when he thinks no one is watching, when he believes his actions carry no personal consequences." Jennifer nodded thoughtfully. "And what did you find out?" "I discovered that my son had absorbed ideas about class and status that deeply concerned me," I said, not sugarcoating it. Despite all the values I tried to teach him about respecting everyone, somewhere along the line he began measuring people by titles, not character. We had reached the glass-walled conference room. Inside, David was pacing, clearly nervous, his materials arranged neatly on the table. I could see the tension in his shoulders, the effort it took to prepare for a conversation that might redefine his career. Jennifer checked the time. "Miss Mitchell should be here any minute." David asked me to sit in for moral support, but with everything that's happened, I'm not sure that's the right call. "I think he needs to do this alone," I said, "but your support means more than you probably realize." Most people wouldn't stand by someone after discovering they'd lied, especially not about something as personal as their own mother. Jennifer gave a small, thoughtful smile. "David made poor choices, but I don't think he's a bad person. I think he tried so hard to craft the perfect image of success that he lost touch with what matters most." Before I could respond, Robert Mitchell stepped out of the elevator. He moved with his usual calm efficiency, juggling a briefcase and his phone. He looked like a man managing deadlines and decisions, completely unaware of the emotional reckoning that was about to unfold. "Morning, Jennifer," he said, barely looking up. "Is David ready? I've got a call with HQ at 11, so we'll need to keep this on schedule." "He's ready," she said, then turned toward me with a subtle shift in tone. "Mr. Mitchell, I'd like you to meet Maria Santos. She has a separate meeting with you later this morning." Mitchell extended his hand, giving me the polite but distant look of someone who assumed I was a vendor rep or maybe a consultant. There was no hint of recognition, not of the woman who had scrubbed the floors beneath his feet the day before, nor of the mother whose story David was about to share. "Miss Santos, nice to meet you. Are you with one of our service partners?" "In a way," I replied with a faint smile. We'll discuss it after your meeting with David. Mitchell gave a brief nod and stepped into the room where David waited. The glass door swung shut, and I took a seat in the adjacent break room, close enough to observe without intruding. Jennifer stayed beside me. Together we watched as David began the most difficult conversation of his professional life. Through the transparent walls, I could see the tension in his posture. He spoke carefully, gesturing now and then as he explained some. Mitchell listened intently, occasionally nodding or interjecting with a question, though we couldn't hear their words. The tone of their body language told a story. 10 minutes in, Mitchell's demeanor shifted. He leaned back, clearly surprised, then forward again. His attention sharpened. David was becoming more animated, his gestures wider, his confidence growing. He had moved past the rehearsed beginning. Now he was speaking from the heart. Jennifer watched too, her voice barely above a whisper. I wonder how Mitchell's taking it. Better than David feared, I think, I said. He doesn't look angry. If anything, he seems curious, maybe even impressed. The meeting continued for another 15 minutes, with both men appearing to be in serious but not hostile conversation. At one point, Mitchell pulled out his phone and seemed to be taking notes or making a voice recording. David's confidence appeared to be growing as the discussion progressed, suggesting that Mitchell's response was more positive than he had feared. Finally, both men stood up and shook hands, with Mitchell actually clapping David on the shoulder in what looked like a gesture of approval or encouragement. When they emerged from the conference room, David's relief was visible from across the hallway. David, that took real courage, Mitchell was saying as they approached where Jennifer and I were waiting. I'm actually more impressed by your insights knowing they come from authentic experience, rather than academic research. That kind of genuine understanding is exactly what we need for this market expansion. David's face lit up with a combination of relief and gratitude. Thank you, Mr. Mitchell. I was worried that you might think I had misrepresented my qualifications. On the contrary, Mitchell replied, you've demonstrated exactly the kind of integrity and authenticity that we value in leadership positions. Your promotion stands, and I'm even more confident that you're the right person for this expanded role. I felt genuine pride in my son's courage, and in Mitchell's response to David's honesty. It was a reminder that authenticity often yields better results than deception, even when the truth seems risky to reveal. Mitchell checked his watch and looked in my direction. Miss Santos, I believe you wanted to discuss some business matters. I have about 20 minutes before my conference call. Actually, David interjected, looking at me with an expression that mixed nervousness and determination. Mr. Mitchell, there's something else you should know. Something that will help you understand the full context of everything we've been discussing. Mitchell looked curious but patient, clearly willing to listen to whatever additional information David felt was important to share. Santos isn't just here on business, David continued, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. She's my mother, and she's also the person who cleaned your conference room yesterday when we had the flooding crisis. The change in Mitchell's expression was immediate and dramatic. His eyes widened as he looked back and forth between David and me, clearly struggling to process this unexpected revelation. The professional composure he maintained in most business situations wavered as he tried to reconcile the cleaning lady from yesterday with the professionally dressed woman standing before him. Your mother is the cleaning staff member who prepared our meeting room? Mitchell asked, his voice carrying a note of disbelief. Yes, David replied firmly, and she's also the owner of this building. Mom, I think it's time Mr. Mitchell knew the whole truth about who you really are. I stepped forward, extending my business card to Mitchell with the same professional confidence I used in all my business dealings. Robert Mitchell, I'm Maria Santos, CEO of Santos Property Group. We own Summit Business Plaza, and TechForward Solutions is one of our valued tenants. Mitchell stared at my business card for a long moment, then looked up at me with an expression that suggested his entire understanding of the previous day's events was being completely rewritten. You own this building, you're our landlord? I am. I'm also the founder of Apex Cleaning Services, the company that maintains this facility. Yesterday when your conference room flooded, I personally responded to ensure that David's presentation could proceed without delay. The implications of this revelation were clearly hitting Mitchell in waves. Not only had he unknowingly made dismissive comments about service workers to the building owner, but he had done so while that owner was actively working to save his employees' career opportunity. "I need to sit down," Mitchell said, moving toward the nearest chair. This is unprecedented. I had no idea that the cleaning staff member who helped us yesterday was actually the building owner." Jennifer, who had been watching this exchange with fascination, decided to provide additional context. "Mr. Mitchell, when you and David were discussing service workers yesterday, you were talking about David's mother. She heard everything you both said about cleaning staff being invisible and focused only on tactical execution." The color drained from Mitchell's face as he remembered his specific comments about service workers not understanding business environments. "Oh God," he said quietly. "The things I said about cleaning staff not comprehending the bigger picture. I was talking about the woman who owns the building and runs multiple companies." "Yes," I said calmly. You were also agreeing with my son's assessment that people like me are practically invisible and don't deserve the same consideration as professionals." Mitchell looked genuinely stricken by the realization of how his words and attitudes must have appeared to someone who had been witnessing them while providing essential services. "Miss Santos, I owe you a sincere and deep apology," Mitchell began. "What I said yesterday was out of line, unprofessional, disrespectful, and inappropriate, no matter who was listening." "Your words were more than just inappropriate," I replied calmly. "They revealed something deeper, the way you and David perceive people whose labor you consider less valuable. It wasn't just about language, Mr. Mitchell. It was about an attitude, the quiet assumption that service workers aren't worthy of attention, respect, or even basic humanity, that they don't understand or matter." David moved closer, his expression now one of genuine realization. A man finally facing the full weight of his actions. "Mr. Mitchell," he said, "my mother has worked the cleaning shift on this floor for 3 years. In all that time, I never once acknowledged her, thanked her, or treated her like anything more than background noise. I acted exactly as I described service workers yesterday, like she was invisible." Mitchell turned to him, clearly perplexed. "But if you knew who she was, that she owns this building, that she's a successful entrepreneur, why treat her that way?" "I didn't know," David admitted, his voice quiet but steady. "She kept that part of her life hidden. I truly believed she was just a janitor, and I was ashamed, not of her, as it turns out, but of what I thought she represented. I assumed she had failed to aim higher, when in truth she had already achieved more than I could imagine." Mitchell shook his head slowly, stunned. "So you were embarrassed by what you thought was her limited success when she was actually running a thriving business, choosing to stay close to you in the most hands-on way possible?" "Yes," David replied. "I let stereotypes and assumptions blind me. I saw the uniform and overlooked the woman." The full irony of the situation was clearly sinking in for Mitchell. He had connected with David over a shared disregard for service workers, never realizing they were speaking, quite literally, about David's mother, and even more significantly about his own landlord, a woman who had built a business empire while being dismissed by the very people who benefited from her work. "Miss Santos," Mitchell said, turning toward me with a seriousness that hadn't been there before, "I need to take responsibility for what I said. First, I want to express my full and unreserved apology. My remarks were disrespectful and reflect attitudes I now deeply regret. Second, I want to thank you. Your swift action yesterday saved that presentation, and your professionalism under pressure was a model of service excellence. TechForward Solutions values our relationship with Santos Property Group, and now I understand why that relationship exists in the first place." "Thank you," I replied. "I accept your apology." But beyond David's presentation, there's a larger issue here, about how service workers are treated in this building, and how we define professional respect. "We need to talk about that," Mitchell nodded. "You're absolutely right. This experience has opened my eyes. I'd like to have a longer, more structured conversation about how we can ensure respect and inclusion for all workers, not just those with titles or offices." "I'm open to that," I said. "But before we go further, I want to ask something important about David's promotion. Mitchell raised an eyebrow, visibly uncertain. Of course. What would you like to know? I want to know why he was promoted, I said direct. Was it because of his actual work and insight, or because you saw in him a shared disregard for working-class people, and that made you feel comfortable? The question landed heavily. It wasn't just about David's future, it was about the culture of the organization itself, what it rewarded, and what it ignored. Mitchell took a long pause, then replied carefully. His promotion was based on merit, on the strength of his analysis, the clarity of his strategic thinking, and his ability to translate research into actionable plans. That other conversation, it had no bearing on my professional evaluation. I promise you that. I'm relieved to hear it, I said, because David is talented, and if his insights are valued, then it's important you know where they truly come from. They weren't drawn from textbooks or trend reports. They come from his real experience, from growing up with a mother who built a business with her own hands, while remaining part of the working-class community she came from. Mitchell turned to David, and for the first time, his expression softened with genuine respect. That makes your work even more valuable, David. Insight grounded in real-world experience is exactly what we need if we want to reach the communities we claim to serve. Jennifer, who had been quiet up until then, stepped forward. Miss Mitchell, this situation reveals a lot about how people feel pressured to hide their backgrounds, to fit into a professional mold. David's story isn't rare, it's just unusually visible today. But we can't afford to keep pretending that lived experience is less valid than formal training. You're absolutely right, Mitchell said, nodding. We need to shift our culture, not just in what we say, but in what we reward. People shouldn't feel the need to mask their history to be taken seriously. I turned to Dave. Do you feel ready to accept this promotion, knowing now that it's based on who you really are, not who you pretended to be? David looked around the room at Mitchell, Jennifer, and finally at me. Yes, he said firmly, because I no longer feel like I need to hide. I'm proud of my background, I'm proud of my work, and I'm proud to be the son of a woman who built a company from the ground up while raising me on her own. If this promotion is an acknowledgement of all that, then I'll accept it with honor. Mitchell stood and extended his hand again, this time not just as a boss, but as someone who was learning to see differently. Congratulations, David. Your promotion is confirmed, and I'm looking forward to seeing how your authentic insights contribute to our market expansion effort. As they shook hands, I felt a sense of resolution about David's professional situation, but there were still personal issues between us that needed to be addressed, conversations about respect and recognition that couldn't be resolved in a business meeting. Mr. Mitchell, I appreciate your professionalism in handling this situation. I think both David and I have learned valuable lessons about authenticity and respect. I look forward to continuing our business relationship with a better understanding of each other's perspective. Absolutely, Mitchell replied. And Miss Santos, I hope you'll consider consulting with us on our market expansion strategy. Your insights as both a successful entrepreneur and someone who understands diverse market segments could be invaluable for our growth plan. It was an unexpected offer that reflected genuine recognition of my business capabilities, rather than polite gestures meant to smooth over an awkward situation. I'd be interested in discussing that possibility. Let's schedule a proper business meeting to explore how Santos Property Group might contribute to TechForward Solutions' strategic objective. As Mitchell gathered his materials and prepared to leave for his conference call, the immediate crisis seemed to be resolving in ways that none of us could have predicted when the day began. David had been honest about his background and been rewarded for that honesty. Mitchell had confronted his own biases and committed to addressing them. The professional relationships had been strengthened rather than damaged by the revelation of truth. But as Mitchell headed toward the elevator, I realized that the real work was just beginning. The conversation between David and me about our personal relationship, about respect and recognition and authentic connection, was still ahead of us. The professional crisis had been resolved, but the family crisis required deeper conversations and more fundamental changes in how we related to each other. David turned to me as Mitchell disappeared into the elevator. Mom, I know that fixing my professional situation doesn't address what I did to you personally. I know that apologizing isn't enough to make up for 3 years of treating you like you were invisible. What do I need to do to earn back your respect and rebuild our relationship? It was the right question, asked with genuine humility and awareness of the work that lay ahead. But answering it would require both of us to examine not just what had gone wrong between us, but what we wanted our relationship to become going forward. That's a conversation that's going to take time, I replied, and it's going to require both of us to be completely honest about what we want from each other and what we're willing to change about how we interact. Jennifer, who had witnessed this entire transformation, looked at both of us with something that might have been hope. I think you're both ready for that conversation now in a way that you weren't yesterday. Sometimes crisis creates the opportunity for the kind of honest communication that should have happened years ago. As we prepared to leave the conference room and begin the work of rebuilding our relationship, I realized that the revelation of my true identity had accomplished something I hadn't expected. It had forced all of us to confront assumptions and attitudes that had been operating beneath the surface of our interactions. The crisis had been painful, but it had also created the possibility for more authentic and respectful relationships going forward. The confrontation was complete, but the real transformation was just beginning. 6 months later, I stood in the boardroom of Santos Property Group's downtown headquarters, watching David present a comprehensive market analysis to our executive team. The young man addressing our board bore little resemblance to the employee who had once dismissed his mother as practically invisible. This David spoke with confidence rooted in authenticity rather than manufactured professional image. The data clearly shows that our mixed-use developments perform best in neighborhoods with strong working-class foundations, David explained, gesturing toward charts that reflected months of genuine community engagement. These aren't just market segments to be analyzed from a distance. These are communities with deep social networks, economic resilience, and long-term stability that translate into reliable tenant relationships. Patricia Valdez, our head of acquisitions, leaned forward with interest. David, your insights into community dynamics seem particularly nuanced. What's your methodology for understanding these neighborhood characteristics? Without hesitation, David smiled and looked directly at me. My methodology starts with having been raised by a mother who taught me that every person has dignity and worth regardless of their job title or income level. Everything I understand about working-class communities comes from watching Maria Santos build this company while never forgetting where she came from or who she was serving. The transformation in David's comfort with his background still amazed me. The son who had once been ashamed to acknowledge his cleaning lady mother now introduced me at business conferences as the woman who had taught him everything meaningful about leadership and perseverance. After the meeting concluded, David joined me in my office overlooking the Phoenix skyline. The space reflected both my business success and my commitment to remembering my roots, with family photos sharing shelf space with industry awards and a small display case containing my original cleaning supplies from Apex Cleaning Services. "How did I do today?" David asked, settling into the chair across from my desk with the easy familiarity that had replaced our former tension. "You were brilliant," I replied honestly. "Your presentation demonstrated exactly the kind of strategic thinking that our clients need, grounded in authentic understanding of the communities we serve." "I had a good teacher," David said with a grin, "though I'm still learning to balance the son and employee. It's complicated working for your mother when your mother owns half of downtown Phoenix." We had indeed navigated the complexities of David joining Santos Property Group after his experience at TechForward Solutions. Robert Mitchell had been genuinely supportive of David's decision to leave for a leadership position with our company, understanding that the opportunity to work with his mother represented both professional advancement and personal growth that couldn't be matched elsewhere. "Speaking of teaching," I said, reaching for a folder on my desk, "Jennifer Walsh asked me to review her application for our management trainee program. She's interested in transitioning from marketing to real estate development. David's face lit up with enthusiasm. Jennifer would be incredible in property development. She has exactly the kind of authentic curiosity about different communities that makes for great neighborhood investment decisions. Plus, she's one of the most genuinely respectful people I've ever worked with. Jennifer had indeed become a regular part of our extended professional family. Her loyalty during the crisis at TechForward Solutions had evolved into a friendship that transcended workplace boundaries. She often joined us for dinner, bringing perspectives that challenged both David and me to think more deeply about our business practices and community impact. There's something else I wanted to discuss with you, I continued, pulling out a newspaper clipping that had arrived in the morning mail. The Phoenix Business Journal wants to feature Santos Property Group in their annual profile of women-owned businesses. They're particularly interested in the story of how I built the company while raising you as a single mother. David examined the article proposal with the careful attention he now brought to all business decisions. This could be great publicity for the company. Your story demonstrates exactly the kind of perseverance and strategic thinking that attracts quality investors and partners. But it would also mean going public with details about our family history that we've kept private for years, I pointed out, including the 3 years I spent cleaning offices in a building I owned while you worked there without knowing who I was. Are you concerned about how that story might reflect on me professionally? David asked, and I could hear in his voice that he was prepared for whatever answer I might give. I'm not concerned about professional perception, I replied. I'm curious about whether you're ready to have that story become part of your public professional identity, because once it's published, everyone will know about the son who was ashamed of his cleaning lady mother. David was quiet for a moment, considering the implications of our family drama becoming public knowledge. When he spoke, his voice carried the same decisiveness that had characterized his business presentations. I think that story needs to be told, he said firmly. Not because I enjoy admitting how badly I treated you, but because it illustrates something important about assumptions and stereotypes that affect a lot of families. How many other people are walking around ashamed of parents who are actually their greatest sources of strength and wisdom? It might be uncomfortable for you when colleagues and clients read about your behavior during that period, I warned. It should be uncomfortable, David replied. The discomfort reminds me to never again take for granted the people who love me, or assume that someone's worth is determined by their job title. Besides, the story doesn't end with my mistake. It ends with learning to value authenticity over image, and building a career based on genuine strengths, rather than manufactured persona. I felt the familiar surge of pride that came from watching David demonstrate the kind of integrity and self-awareness that made him not just a good son but a good person. The young man who had once measured his success by his ability to distance himself from his background, now measured it by his ability to honor that background while building something meaningful. Then we'll do the interview, I decided, but I have one condition. I want us to be interviewed together. This isn't just the story of Maria Santos building a business empire, it's the story of a mother and son learning to see each other clearly, and building a relationship based on mutual respect rather than convenient illusion. David's smile was genuine and warm. I'd be honored to tell that story with you. As we prepared to leave the office for our traditional Thursday dinner, I reflected on how completely our relationship had transformed. The mother who had hidden her success to protect her son's independence had learned that authentic connection required authentic revelation. The son who had been embarrassed by his mother's work had learned that there was no greater source of professional strength than the values and insights she had instilled in him. We no longer needed carefully maintained deceptions or protective illusions. David knew exactly who I was, and I knew exactly who he was becoming. The relationship built on that foundation of complete honesty was stronger and more satisfying than anything we had shared during the years of careful performance and mutual protection. Walking through the lobby of Santos Property Group's headquarters, I caught sight of our reflection in the polished marble walls. Two successful business professionals, obviously related, obviously comfortable with each other and with themselves. The woman who had once cleaned offices to stay connected to her son's world, now worked alongside that son to build something larger than either of them could have achieved alone. That evening, As we settled into our favorite restaurant for our weekly dinner, David raised his water glass in an impromptu toast. To Maria Santos, he said with genuine warmth, the cleaning lady who owned the building, the mother who never stopped believing in her son's potential, and the business partner who taught me that success means nothing if it requires you to forget who you really are. To David Santos, I replied, raising my own glass, the son who had the courage to choose authenticity over image, and the business partner who proves every day that the next generation can build on the foundation of the previous one, while making it even stronger. As we touched glasses, I realized that the story that had begun with shame and dismissal had evolved into something beautiful, a genuine partnership between two people who finally saw each other clearly, and liked what they saw. The cleaning lady had indeed owned the building, but more importantly, she had raised a son worthy of inheriting not just her business success, but her values and integrity. The transformation was complete, and the future looked brighter than either of us had dared to imagine. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.